You may be guilty of this, but one thing that I've definitely noticed over the years is that the average producer typically loads up an orchestral instrument and just does this. In today's video, I'm going to show you some really simple tips that are going to help you create more compelling and more realistic sounding orchestral parts for your productions. So before we get started, there's two things that I want to point out really quickly here. Number one is today we're going to be using the String Ensemble from Native Instruments Symphony Essentials. This is included in the Komplete Ultimate collections. And the second part that I want to add here is that don't worry, this stuff is going to be explained in very simple terms because that's the way that I've had to learn. So on the user interface, we're going to start with the articulations because these are very important to understand to get the sound that you want. And the nice thing about having the Komplete control keyboard is that they're mapped out on the keyboard that you can switch back and forth. The first articulation is the sustains, which I'm sure that most of you are familiar with. Sometimes it's also called legato, and it sounds like this. The next articulation that you really want to be familiar with is staccato. These are those short detached notes that you hear. You also have pizzicato, which is very short as well, but these are actually plucked. That's very common for sneaky sounding music. And with the string ensemble here, you actually have 8 different articulations. Another notable one here is the tremolo, as well as the trills. One feature that I do want to point out here before we move on, for the short notes with the Symphony Essentials, there's a repetition part here, and you have 3 different times that you can choose from. If you engage that, then you can do this. Now, let's jump back to the sustains, and you'll notice that the biggest part of the user interface is the dynamics, and this is where understanding the instruments comes into play a little bit here. Let's dial back the dynamics knob all the way, and I'm using my mod wheel here, which vast majority of the time is what this is automated to. And this is how you kind of create that realistic bowing sound. And at first, this might come across as just the volume going up and down, but it's actually not. Basically, it's not about the volume, it's about the tone and the intensity of the sound. And when using long sustained notes like that, it's one of the most important things to use to create realistic sounds. Now we're gonna go back to the staccatos here, and I'm gonna point out something you may or may not have heard before, and that is a round robin. So this is a feature that you do find in a lot of orchestral sampled libraries. Having a round robin sampling system is something that helps create more realistic performances without you even actively having to do anything. And basically you'll see the 4 dots on here represent 4 different samples of the same velocity. So, you know, if I am picking a note on the guitar, I'm not playing it exactly the same 4 times in a row. It's just impossible. So as I play the notes here, you're gonna notice the circles move around randomly, and that just allows for a more realistic sound. And if we didn't have the round robin samples, you're gonna get what they call the machine gun effect. It's basically if you were to use a one-shot sample and try to create a realistic violin section, it's not gonna sound good at all. Side note, if you are like me and you're trying to produce those really big sports anthemic sounding hip hop tracks, use this slam knob because it's just a compressor that just makes it beefy. And the next tip is do not quantize. Quantize to the strength that you need to if it's a very bad performance that you've done on the keyboard. But you'll notice that with the sustained instruments especially, you're probably going to want to start ahead of the beat because it takes them a while with the attack to get in there. And you'll find that actually in real orchestras that's how the string sections play. They play ahead of the beat. The next important tip to remember is that you need to use the different articulations in your productions. So utilize the key switches if you have a keyboard, or program it in afterwards, or use automation, whatever you have to do. And the last tip is the importance of layering. And then as a quick example here, you can see in one of my production music tracks how I layered horns and strings together.